Before we begin the webinar, I would just like to begin by saying that we're bringing you this webinar from Brandon, Manitoba, which is situated in Treaty 2 territory.
So first of all, we just want to start by thanking you, Megan. Thank you for organizing. Thank you for Brandon University and for the Rural Policy Learning Commons for organizing and having us, and we're delighted to be here. So Helen and I are also in two different locations. So I want to start by saying that I respectfully acknowledge that I'm a guest on Treaty 6 territory located in Edmonton, Alberta. This is the traditional lands of many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, the Métis, and the Nakota Sioux. And this treaty acknowledgement is really important for us as an Indigenous organization, Cando, because we have deep, deep respect for the territories that we live and work on, and of course for the treaties that exist and for the nations and peoples who have been here since time immemorial. So with that, I thank you very much.
Good morning. This is Helen Patterson here, speaking to you from Ottawa. And I want to acknowledge that I'm located, and our FCM offices are located on the unceded Algonquin territory. And we thank the Algonquin for the stewardship of their land and for having us here in their territory. And I just want to add that we do this acknowledgement as a municipal organization to remind us of our history and where we are today. And it is the best practice that we have. Most of our members are following this across the country, municipalities that are acknowledging treaty and territories across the country, and both on the CEDI program and beyond our other members. And I just want to say I'm here today. I also have on my team from the FCM office as part of the CEDI broader team, Josh Renier. He's not with us, but I just want to acknowledge that he's a very important part of our team.
Again, my name is Marissa Lawrence. I work as a Senior Program Officer with CEDI from Cando side of things. Helen will say a little bit more about what CEDI is, but Cando is the Council for the Advancement of Native Development Officers. We are located in Edmonton, Alberta. We're a national not-for-profit Indigenous organization, and our work and our services really focus on capacity building, specifically for economic development officers who work in Indigenous communities. We are membership-based, and we have 500 members across the country. And I too want to acknowledge that I work as part of a really wonderful team at Cando, and specifically I share most roles and responsibilities on CEDI with my colleague Tanya Taranjo, who also helped to put this presentation together. Over to you, Helen.
I'm Helen Patterson. I'm the program manager for the First Nation Municipal Community Economic Development Initiative, and I'm in the Federation of Canadian Municipalities office. And for those of you who don't know FCM, we are a national organization, a membership-based organization with over 2,000 municipalities who are our members across the country. And welcome to any of our members who are online with us today. And our role is an advocacy organization, and we do this by bringing together all Canadian municipalities to speak with one voice to influence federal government policies and programs that affect municipalities. And we do this we have a mission statement, by listening, uniting, and influencing. And I like to think of this as how we get to do this through the First Nation Municipal Collaboration Program and our other First Nation Municipal initiatives, is that we get to bring together municipalities and First Nation governments to listen and learn from each other, and then unite around issues and initiatives that they can serve their citizens together for mutual benefit through their actions. So and then move to action. We have a series here at FCM of national and international programs, and some of our work in terms of advocacy and work for our members, you may know through the gas tax initiative, which brought more municipal funds provided through gas taxation, and also most recent infrastructure work and infrastructure resources that are coming through from the federal government have been one of our main focuses, and now housing is one of our issues that our membership is working on. So that's for us at FCM. And I'll just say that we were introduced to to Cando in 2012, and it's been a fantastic partnership. And we feel that the program of having a First Nation government and Indigenous voice, along with the municipal voice, really helps us do this work very collaboratively and really model the kind of partnership that we'd love to see across the country. Over to you, Marissa.
Great. So I'll ask Helen for the next slide, as you're controlling it on your end. So while we have a really short time with you here today, we have a lot to share. And so we wanted to sort of address a couple of learning outcomes for you. So really it is to be able to understand the CEDI program, the Stronger Together approach, to understand what joint community economic development, or CED, is, to understand the benefits of joint CED, particularly in rural communities, as we know that's an interest of the Rural Policy Learning Commons, to identify opportunities for joint CED, to understand and apply best practices of developing joint CED, and to apply the Stronger Together Toolkit to collaboration and joint CED. Next slide, Helen. So we have two main goals for the CEDI program. The first is to establish sustainable and resilient relationships, in our case, particularly between First Nations and municipalities, their elected officials, their senior staff, and the broader community members. And secondly, to increase the capacity of participating communities to engage in, learn from one another, develop joint community economic development initiatives and long-term land use plans. You know, we believe that CEDI fills, and the Stronger Together approach fills, a bit of a gap. There isn't a pre-established venue for local governments and First Nations to come together to engage in joint planning. But we see such a natural partnership, given that nations and municipalities share boundaries, share borders, and ultimately they have a shared interest for regional prosperity and the well-being of their citizens. So we really believe in this process that we call CED. So community economic development is a process by which communities can initiate and generate their own solutions to the common economic problems that they experience, and thereby build long-term community capacity, and they ensure the integration of economic, social, and environmental objectives. Furthermore, CED really allows communities to generate their own multiple bottom line solutions to economic problems. This is not economic development that exists outside of the community. This is truly community-based, and it allows communities to address all facets of healthy community life and living. It also stabilizes local economies. It helps to create long-term employment. It contributes to the health of the natural environment. It builds on pre-existing local resources and capacities, and ultimately it increases community control and ownership. So what is joint CED? So it is the process of bringing together two or more, in the case that we work in, specifically First Nations and municipalities. So neighboring communities that develop and implement joint community economic development. They do so based on a shared vision for a prosperous future for their members and residents of both communities, and for the broader regional economy. Potential partners that we've identified: neighboring First Nations, municipalities, tribal councils, economic development corporations, and we work with a combination of all of these partners. And each of these partnerships looks different, but Joint CED presents the opportunity to learn specifically about the Indigenous partners' sovereignty, about their sovereign rights, and about the culture, governance, and jurisdiction of each partner. And once the partnership has done some of that initial learning and foundation building, and once they're starting to have a joint plan, they often find quite useful to bring in additional partners, regional stakeholders. So someone like the Chamber of Commerce or education institutions or other community organizations. And the broader engagement of community partners increases, again, the broader understanding and education throughout the community, which only builds awareness and support for Joint CED. So through many of our partnerships, we've heard many benefits. specifically of joint First Nation Municipal CEDI. So a stronger united voice for engaging with businesses and other levels of government, the increased ability to access funding from other levels of government. These two really speak to the different and unique relationship that, for instance, First Nations have with the federal government and municipalities have with the provincial government. The next three: cost savings and more efficient program delivery, more opportunities for local business development and job creation, the ability to leverage the unique financial and physical resources of each partner. This really speaks to increased opportunity and, in fact, that we are stronger together. And finally, the coordinated planning efforts to improve land use, land management, and environmental resource protection. Obviously, it's advantageous to be in conversation with one another to better understand land significance, planned land use, intention for infrastructure, existing infrastructure. It's better to be involved in that conversation in a development phase rather than at a later date. So given that we're working with the Rural Policy Learning Commons and we're aware of the specific interest in rural communities, we find, obviously there's a really strong use and strong case for CEDI in rural communities, but we also absolutely advocate for joint CEDI in urban environments as well, as we work with a number of large cities and large nations. But rural communities and First Nations are not unfamiliar with the concept of economic inequality and depleted economies. However, this is for very different reasons. So, by nature of the assimilative policies of the Indian Act, First Nations being placed on reserve lands that are often without resources, without access to traditional hunting and fishing grounds, and sometimes even without access to nearby services or communities. However, these lands are often in close proximity to traditional territory. There's treaty rights, and there's obviously a great spiritual and cultural importance to land. For very different reasons, many rural municipalities have experienced economic hardship, and perhaps this is because of a boom and bust cycle with industry or global market trends. And while many rural municipalities are economically depleted, many residents remain in those communities because it's where they've built a home, it's where they've raised a family. And so, this is again why we recommend joint CEDI. It focuses on communities building themselves. It increases capacity and builds on the local community's strengths. It encourages communities to take matters into their own hands and take proactive action rather than waiting for external partners to make those decisions, government, industry. And instead, it allows an opportunity for First Nations and municipalities to work with one another rather than waiting for those external bodies. Ultimately, joint CEDI presents an approach that empowers communities for its own long-term economic strategy. It focuses on strengths and opportunities, and really it finds innovative solutions that are reflective of the community's values and cultures. So I think that's probably enough about why we advocate for joint CEDI, and I'll turn it over to Helen to tell us a little bit more about the Stronger Together approach that we use, which is a joint CEDI approach. I'll leave it with you.
Thank you, Marissa. And just to, thanks for that great background. And just to then give a little bit of more context on our program, we've been doing this since 2013, and it started with a pilot program that's Cando and FCM designed together. And we had 250 applications, more than that, in fact, when we first launched out to say who would like to do this with us. And we only had resources for 6 partnerships, and we learned a lot from them. And what you'll see in the toolkit that we have online is a result of that work. And then we were fortunate for our funder, INAC, in 2016 decided to expand the program. And we started in 2016, we had over 90 applications. Some of them were joint applications at this point now, First Nation governments and municipalities wanting the support of the program. And we were able to take on 10 partnerships, and that's who we're working with now. We don't have any more intake to the program, but we do have these tools and lots of examples, and that's what we'll be exploring with you for the rest of our webinar today. So as Marissa mentioned, this Stronger Together approach is meant to be a long-term initiative in terms of setting communities up, First Nation governments and municipal governments up together as partners for the long term. And what we've learned is there's 4 stages that we see as important to solidifying this long-term partnership for the future. And it starts with and tools associated with each of these steps are in our toolkit. So the first stage we see as a connecting phase. And that's where those very initial meetings, perhaps the First Nation government and municipal government have not had a meeting together, council to council and with staff. And this first step is really important as a way to learn about each other's histories and have a baseline and understand, evaluate together what one another knows about culture and governance and decision making and what the status of the current perspective of where the partnership is at. And agendas for all this type of first meeting, of course, are in our toolkit. And that's a really important first stage to start to get comfortable with what we know of one another and share anything you think the other partner needs to know. And it's a stage where often economic development strategies are shared as well, or any kind of relevant planning documents. And that's where it starts to look at what might there be in common in terms of initiatives to work on. And in our process, we at that step ask the elected officials and staff to go back to the respective councils, to the band council and to the municipal council, and pass a resolution to move forward and plan to work together. And in our context, it's for 3 years that we provide support to get them launched. So that's a very important stage, is having the leadership and the staff all on board that this is something that's commitment to work on together. The next step, we call it the vision stage, and that's where beyond just working on a specific initiative, it's to look at what will it be like for the First Nation government and the municipal government and their communities to have a vision for the next, what would it look like if they worked together for 20 years or more. And that's a really important step because it gives a chance to engage in a bigger picture thinking and holistically, what would it look like if collaboration continues and benefits everybody and mutually in the communities. And that exercise leads to another step, which has been very, very successful. And it's creating a relationship or a friendship accord where it does spell out what would that vision be and how would they want to work together and create that accord that's a public acknowledgement of this partnership that's going to be carried on into the future. And we've seen that step be accompanied by things like a public signing. We're going to talk about an example a little later, the Kibawak Timiskaming Kibawa partnership, and they did their relationship accord, their friendship accord signature on National Aboriginal Day in 2014. And that was the first time they both ever celebrated that together. So it's really a turning point to celebrate with the community this partnership. And moving on to the next stage, which is around deciding, and in our case, we look at let's get some success and learn how to work on together through one initiative, and perhaps there are more, but to really to work around one successful initiative to build capacity of how to work together. And for this, at that point, there's a need to have an established working group, joint working group or committee. It depends on the communities what they would like to call this group, but sometimes it's called a CEDI working group. And to have terms of reference for this group so it's quite clear who's involved and a work plan, etc. And start working towards a joint initiative. And then the fourth stage, if you like, is really the act, and that's the implementation of whatever the joint initiative may be, and we'll talk about some of those. And also reporting back and coming back to the councils and sharing with what's going on and asking for support where needed. And also other stakeholders are often brought in at this point as well, and often a regional approach begins to develop because of the initiative launching a chance to see their communities holistically as part of a joint regional economy. And we have a few examples, as I mentioned, to share with you that have come out of our work with our partners in phase one, as we call it, from 2013 to 2016 pilot, and then this current phase. So some of the examples that have been worked on, Regional Economic Development Strategic Plan. We saw that in Manitoba, where Opaskwaik Cree Nation and the PAW and the Rural Municipality of Kelsey worked together on bringing other partners around the table, looking at regionally what were their strengths, what were their assets, what would they market together. They put together a formal brochure and a website page that would really sell the area and look at their development together as a region. This also involved sharing land use plans and looking at treaty land entitlement opportunities, and this really brought them together, a lot of knowledge and a more coherent approach to the region. Joint tourism strategies have been another example of coming out of this joint planning process, and we'll speak in detail about one that came out of Quebec. Joint land use plans, joint planning, we have an example Marissa will speak to from Nova Scotia. Out in Slave Lake, the town of Slave Lake and the Sawridge First Nation and the Lesser Slave River Municipal District built a multi-purpose municipal hall, a multi-purpose legacy hall together. This is after they struggled through rebuilding together after the terrible 2011 fires, and this became a joint project that they built out of the ashes and collaborating together. Northern Ontario has a very interesting program on addressing food insecurities together. The Sioux Lookout is the municipality that's a hub for many services for 31 First Nations who are north of there, and Kitchimakusabinaweg, a fly-in community north of Sioux Lookout, and Lac Seul, which is a First Nation adjacent to Sioux Lookout municipality, have put together a project to address food insecurity and distribution issues, and that's a project that came out of their collaboration over several years. And then one in Saskatchewan, which is interesting, a joint Indigenous employment strategy, which is really in its initial stages. The Tribal Council of the Battleford area tribal chiefs and the City of North Battleford came together on wanting to address need for labor for projects that were coming through North Battleford in terms of their economic development planning committee, and the excellent work that Battleford Agency of Tribal Chiefs does on employment readiness. And so they matched up needs on both sides. And this was in tandem with the City of North Battleford recognizing that their municipal staff didn't really represent the 25% Indigenous population for the City of North Battleford. So they're getting a lot of help from BATC to work towards a more representative workforce. So those are a few examples that have come out of our program, and there are more. So another area of collaboration are joint service agreements, and this is the area of work of the Community Infrastructure Partnership Program, which is a sister program that we have here at FCM, also delivered with the Indigenous partner, the Centre for Indigenous Environmental Research, based in Manitoba. And this program has been running since 2010 and has online, as you can see, the link is there, templates and examples of service agreements where First Nation governments and municipal governments have been able to sell and buy services that they both need in their communities. And certainly when size and location make it even more necessary to share services and collaborate, this is another area of collaboration that we're seeing growing across the country. So we'll start with we're going in depth with one or two examples, and I mentioned this one earlier. We have a fantastic example from the communities of Kibawak First Nation, approximately 500 members, Ville de Timiskaming, which is approximately 4,000 population, and Municipality of Kippawa, approximately 1,000 population, and they're located on the western part of Quebec, near the border to Ontario, not far from North Bay. And they came together because they had in 2013, they'd never worked before together officially, they'd never had a joint meeting. As they said, they coexisted, but they felt a common need to diversify their economy. The town of Timiskaming was built around the forestry sector, and it has an important pulp and paper factory. And most of the population from Kibawak and from Timiskaming and Kippawa are employed there, and it leaves the population quite vulnerable to that industry. So they got together and had their first meeting in 2014 as a joint workshop. And what was also in the room was a contentious issue around mining. And this is a project that the municipality was quite interested in exploring, and Kebowak was quite concerned about the environmental impact that a rare earth mineral mine with open pit mining might have for their, and tailing ponds might have for their communities. So they'd never been in the room together, and it was a place they wanted to start to just at least have a conversation about this. So again, the benefit of having a venue for planning and discussion. We developed a tool that you'll find in the toolkit called the Dialogue Principles. And this was a tool that helped them have a conversation for this purpose and beyond. And we've had many of our communities use the dialogue principles right even in their terms of reference of their working group. And they were able to explore the issue for the first time, hear each other, listen and learn from each other. And then they did agree to disagree, that wasn't going to be an area that they would explore together. And from there, they identified that tourism, with the beautiful lakes in the area, Lake Kippawa, and with the during their environmental scan of what was happening on the horizon, a provincial park called Opemican Park was scheduled to open this year, in fact, 2018. So they saw themselves in this vision of being a gateway to that park and diversifying into a tourism offering that would really support their ability to grow that industry of tourism around the park. So this then led to, they managed to, they formed their working group, they did some visioning and strategic planning together. We supported them on, giving them a small amount of resources to go off on a study tour and look at best practices in the area of tourism around parks, and also to explore how one of their visions was to really showcase the Algonquin culture. So they went to the Wendake Huron Indigenous tourism site up outside Quebec City and learned from that. They went to Algonquin Park and went with their Chamber of Commerce of Timiskaming and Kippawa, and learned how that Chamber of Commerce, as the doorway to the Algonquin Park, has worked with tourism. And then they went to another park across the country on the border of New Brunswick, Timisquata. From these study tours, of course, their relationships built, and they got to really get to know each other. And they also learned that a community consultation would be a really good place to start and build community engagement around this project. So they came back, and we supported them on some facilitation with this, but they engaged their council members. And it was a really interesting turning point, because in terms of municipal and First Nation governance, the municipality was ready to branch out and present some strategic objectives. And the First Nation, the chief at the time, Chief Madeline Paul, said actually they really get their guidance from the community. So that was a way that they used. And so this consultation came together, really bringing in their governance strategies together as how to get the community to be engaged and give direction to elected officials in this group. So I'm happy to report that today they have now a joint tourism strategic plan. They engaged a consultant that we were able to support them with some resources with, who helped them flesh out a very specific steps to move forward on, which involved hiring a joint tourism officer and branding and some tourism products and training. And just last year, they pooled their resources, and they now officially have a joint tourism officer, which again, given the size of their communities, they couldn't do this on their own. And they've branded themselves, and they're well on their way to a very successful joint project. And they continue to meet monthly as they implement this plan. And the joint working group serves as a place for elected officials and staff to share other issues beyond their joint tourism strategy, so that they are able to really collaborate on other initiatives that are possible together. And one last point is, many of you may be aware of addition to reserve and reserve creation. Kebowak was a very small reserve and was looking to expand in terms of for housing and for other purposes. And with this very close collaboration, the municipality of Kippawa and the Timiskaming are able to support the next step of this project. the addition to reserve that Kerouac is putting forward will include a chance to open a sugar bush, which will again be a mutual benefit to all in this region as another tourism offering. So lots of exciting things coming out of their project. And we've just put a quote up here. This was a quote from Chief Madeline Paul, the former chief, who had asked the question early on, why should we work together? The one that answered this best is Martin Luther King. Better to learn to live together than to perish together as fools. So nobody was going anywhere, and they're going to carry on and go into the next generations with that really strong collaboration. And I'll pass over to Marissa for another example.
Thanks, Helen. Given again the focus of the Rural Policy Learning Commons, we wanted to give you a policy example. And as much as our work doesn't directly impact policy and policy change, we absolutely interact with policy. And so specifically, we wanted to give you an example of the additions to reserve, ATR, and joint land use planning. So we have a partnership in our phase 2 of CEDI, Boknakeg Mi'kmaq Nation and the County of Antigonish in Nova Scotia. They've been working with us since 2016 in this phase 2 cycle. And they've done a really, really wonderful job at committing to a working group. And as Helen mentioned, as she was going through the process of Stronger Together, it's incredibly important to have a strong, committed working group who's representative of both elected officials and senior staff from both communities. For a number of different reasons, it diversifies the group. It allows for learning at multiple levels of leadership within the communities. And it's really, really important as we're discussing what can be very, very controversial issues such as land use. So with a little bit of background, Boknakeg is currently moving forward on a $15 million highway interchange. So Boknakeg is currently moving forward on a $15 million interchange project. And this is really resulting from a successful community vote in favor of surrendering 27 hectares of land for this project, a significant development really to increase community connectivity for Boknakeg, create jobs in short and long term, to increase the ability for more housing, increase business opportunities, and provide serviceable land for future growth. It's really important to note that, of course, this land was purchased at fee simple and is intended to gain the ATR additions to reserve status. But however, in the meantime, as it's in this ATR process, policy process, the nation must adhere to municipal taxation and bylaws. And so with that context, we moved into what would be workshop 3 in the CEDI process with these two communities in the fall of 2017. And it was a 2-day workshop, and the first day was very much focused on relationship building. And this is really a common theme throughout CEDI. We can't have relationship building without capacity building, and we really see those two things as the balancing act of CEDI and really the success of Joint CED. So we brought together a large group of elected officials, senior staff members, and community representatives. And the community had decided that they wanted to participate in a Kairos blanket exercise, which is a participatory exercise that directly addresses the historical and current day injustices that Indigenous peoples face in Canada. And it speaks to the nature of the relationship between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada. The latter part of that afternoon was spent drafting the relationship accord. So both communities, Boknakeg and Antigonish, have decided that it would be very important for their partnership to formalize through a relationship accord, which addresses their working group terms of reference, the dialogue principles, how they plan to work with one another, to respect one another's sovereign rights, but also to find that common ground. And this relationship building work was foundational for the second day of the workshop. That second day, we really dove deep into land use planning, and we started the day with a Boknakeg elder who was able to speak to the traditional land use of Boknakeg's land. And it was incredibly impactful. I think it answered a lot of questions for the municipality about the connection to land. And then we were able to speak about, Pagmikeg continued to explain about current land use planning and future land use planning. Similarly, the municipality had an opportunity to share about current and future land use planning. And right there in the room, because of this foundation of strong relationship and because of their dialogue principles and their commitment to open and honest dialogue, there was an opportunity to answer what could have been myths that snowballed into greater and greater issues. But instead, Chief was able to ask Mayor, so while this land is in fee simple, and while we need to adhere to municipal taxation, we're worried about the taxation, the cost associated with that. And right there in the room, the Mayor was able to come back and say, you know, this is actually zoned in this way, and the cost is quite minimal for the yearly taxation costs. And at the same time, the municipality was able to learn much more about the ATR process, addition to reserve process, about really the hoops that the nation is needing to jump through, the long wait time associated often with ATR process. And it gave a certain amount of perspective, I think, for the municipality to understand just what the nation must jump through in order to receive this ATR status and to be able to further develop their own economic opportunities. And so, obviously, this is an extremely important process of holding up relationship building with the future and the moving forward. And so it's been really important too that this highway interchange has not only obviously had the support of the nation who voted for the implementation of this project, but also that the municipality has been extremely supportive. They recognize that the nation, in building on that land, in developing an economic business park and focus on new businesses coming into the region, there's an opportunity for job creation. There's an opportunity for job creation that the nation has said we can't even fill all the jobs necessary, and therefore there's all kinds of employment opportunities for municipal citizens as well. So increasingly we're seeing through dialogue, through understanding, through increased learning, that there's shared and mutual benefits to the addition to reserve opportunity. And I'd like to make note of a really a local example to Brandon. The City of Brandon has done a really, really wonderful job in helping to prepare their council and their municipal citizens with exploring the benefits of ATR, and they've even rebranded it as First Nation urban development areas. So taking away a little bit of that stigma of what an ATR is and what it means, and instead saying we're open for business. Our municipal sort of boundaries are open for business, and we look forward to welcoming First Nation partners through the ATR policy and process. So if you're interested, I really do recommend checking out the work that they've done. So lastly, we invite you to access and use our Stronger Together Toolkit. This is available on our website, free for download. It is 150 pages, but well worth your time, we believe. It's available in English and French. And it really includes a detailed step-by-step guide to initiating and managing the First Nation Municipal Partnership through a CED process, a joint CED process. It includes handouts, templates, workshop agendas, and other tools for implementing the process, as Helen suggested. There's a council resolution template, there's templates for joint communications, there's templates for friendship accords. There's also detailed case studies for how communities have grown and succeeded and improved the quality of life for their citizens through joint CED. And ultimately, it's a guide for helping to build stronger relationships between First Nations and municipalities. The target audience, we think it's beneficial, particularly to elected officials and senior staff members of both, First Nations, municipalities, tribal councils, economic development corporations. But it's also, I think, extremely beneficial for our Canadian population at large, many of the resources I believe are quite transferable as we better understand relationship building and moving forward. We'll also say there's a toolkit at a glance, which is 6 pages rather than 150 pages. So if that's something you'd like to pass along to a colleague, just to sort of warm them to the idea, we would recommend that as a resource as well. So ultimately, we invite you to engage with us. As Helen has mentioned, for the time being, our phase 2 cohort is full, and we're working with some really phenomenal communities that we hope to continue. Well, we know we'll learn from, and we hope to continue to be able to share those resources and those key learnings with you as we move forward and continue to contribute to the greater First Nation municipal learning. So engage with us. Visit our website, download the toolkit. On our website, we have a number of other resources. We have a list of financial resources that our team updates as often as we can, and we hope that these resources will be available to some of you potentially for the implementation of the toolkit. We have a CEDI newsletter. As Helen mentioned, we have a sister program that runs out of FCM, which is focused on First Nation municipal joint infrastructure planning. We have a First Nations municipal network on LinkedIn that we would invite you to join as well. And finally, follow us on Twitter and follow the work that our communities are doing, and let's continue to learn together. So with that, I think we'll hand it back over to Megan, and we'll take any questions if there have been questions rolling in.
Perfect. Thank you, Marissa and Helen. That was a very good webinar. So far we do have some questions, and I recommend putting your questions in the Q&A box as we go along, and I'll start with the ones that have been asked throughout the presentation. First question from Harold Slater is, how do we check various projects, i.e. the Brandon First Nation urban development?
Can I speak to that? It's Helen here. Hi, Gerald. It's nice to hear from you. If you go to the website of the town of Brandon, City of Brandon, I'm sorry, there is some links to that as well. But I'm thinking that it might be nice for us to send the link with you, Megan, because we've mentioned it a couple of times. We'll make sure we send that. But we found out about that through some of the work that FCM, Brandon, of course, is a member of FCM, and but they do have it right on their website. I'm not sure if it's more their promotion of it, but I'd be curious to hear how they have tracked it. Perhaps that's for a future webinar, Megan.
Down. Okay. So our next question is from Ruth Mealy, and she asks, when is the next intake for the CEDI initiative?
Hi, Ruth. Nice to hear from you as well. Ruth helped us with the process of the REAP process, the Regional Economic Assessment process up in northern Manitoba. So it's great to hear from you. We've got lots of CEDI supporters out there and CEDI champions. So this is a great question. We are actually going to put some ideas forward to our funder, to INAC, in the coming year, because we do get this question very often. I think a month doesn't go by when we don't get at least 2 or 3 requests for how can people join the program. And it's a long time to wait, 2021. So we will be working on that. And I would recommend that if you want to sign up for our newsletter and for our LinkedIn, I'll also send the link to the LinkedIn to Megan so she can put that in. That would be a great place to keep tabs of that, and that'll be one of the first places that we would announce any new funding. So thanks for that question, and feel free to write to your MP if you'd like to support more resources to this collaboration work.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is from Anthony McGinnis. He asks, are there plans for future intakes to the program? Yes.
I guess we just covered that one, Anthony. So again, encourage you to sign up to our communication networks that we've promoted here, and we'll be working on that. We'd love to have an announcement. I don't think we don't see anything for this year. However, I will correct myself in saying that SIP, the Infrastructure Partnership Program, will be in a new phase. We're sort of a little bit off in our timing with them. It'll be more focused on infrastructure partnerships. But again, as we know, infrastructure and economic development are very closely tied. So that again will be announced on our newsletter and on our LinkedIn. So you'll hear more about that. And that SIP program is having a new phase starting after March. So sometime after March of this year. There is hope for at least that program to be to at least join in that intake process.
Okay, our next question is from Bill. And he asks, have you thought of completing a cross-case analysis of examples you have with those involved to garner any further learning?
Maybe I'll invite Marissa to join in and think about that one, respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we're always trying to do. And, just yesterday we're talking internally about, even in this current phase, there's key learnings that we want to be sharing, not only externally, but also between our communities that we're working with. Many of the lessons learned are new, that this work is not something that's been happening. I mean, many municipalities and First Nations have worked together over the years. But this idea of joint community economic development is new for many partnerships, and there's many key learnings all the way, as you saw, there's things all the way ranging from joint Indigenous employment strategies to tourism strategies to joint business parks. So tons of opportunity for learning. And so I hope I've answered your question correctly. Helen, feel free to chime in, but I think that is increasingly something we want to be doing, is sharing the key lessons learned and stories of the communities, and doing so, like I say, internally and externally to really grow that learning.
Yes, I don't know if we of course will be publishing, or rather I should say advertising, any opportunities that we have for conferences and forums on the emails and the LinkedIn site. We don't have a lot of academic engagement in the work that we're doing, and that might be interesting. And sort of, this is an academic forum, so we put to invite any colleagues who are doing any studies or anything, any formal academic work on this. It'd be great to be in touch and hear if there's any collaboration we could have on our sharing our examples there. So that might be another place we could be collaborating on these stories and examples.
Okay. Our next question, you may have answered it in a previous answer, but this looks for specifics, so I'll read it anyways. It's from Judy Gucher. When are you expecting to open intake spaces for the program? Are there any expected dates?
Well, I wish everybody on this webinar would write to their MP and ask for more resources. So Judy, I hope you heard the other responses. So there will be, as I was saying, a SIP intake, and then of course we're working on something for CEDI, but no dates or news yet. But please do keep in touch by being on our LinkedIn and on our newsletter. We'll keep you informed.
Okay. Our next question is from Valerie Anderson, and she asks, is there an example of more than one First Nation band working through this process with one municipality?
So Helen,
Marissa, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at the Tribal Council, and then maybe you could speak to the Ontario partnership that we currently have. So we are currently working with the Tribal Council, which is the first for us, for CEDI. It's been very exciting. As Helen mentioned earlier, we've been working with the Battleford Agency Tribal Chiefs, which is a combination of the Tribal Council that looks after a number of First Nations. And of course, that's been very, very interesting, as our partnership has had to do a lot of work to understand the jurisdiction of the Tribal Council and how that is compared to the individual First Nations. That relationship looks very different between municipality and First Nation than it does to First Nation and municipality and Tribal Council. But there are so very many opportunities. And what's been really wonderful is to watch the Tribal Council really explore for themselves how to honor the sovereignty of each individual nation and be sure that they're living up to their mandate as a tribal council. So that's where we came across an opportunity for the municipality and the tribal council to work on an employment strategy, a regional employment strategy, to increase the starting with the city, increasing the workforce at the city to be representative of the Indigenous population of the region. So that has been very interesting. Through all of the major processes, the Battleford's Agency Tribal Chiefs, BATC, has been very respectful of all of their chiefs that they work with. There's been very formal resolution and signature for process of moving ahead with CEDI. We've just now recently heard that we have resolution from both the Tribal Council and the municipality to move forward on a MOU to work with one another specifically on this employment strategy. And so very much the nations are involved and invited to continue to be involved at all of our workshops. We invite representatives from all of the nations, but ultimately the Tribal Council has that blessing for this jurisdiction, for this particular project, to move it forward.
Thanks, Marissa. Maybe I can complement that with, to answer your question, Valerie, there's two other examples of multiple First Nations working with municipal partners. So one example would be in Ontario, this municipality of Sioux Lookout, in partnership with Kitchimekusa-Benewek, the Fly-In community, and Lac-Seul, who are more in proximity First Nation government neighbors to the municipality of Sioux Lookout. And it was a great partnership because Kitchimekusa being a Fly-In and being more remote, they didn't actually have as a direct relationship through planning with Lac-Seul, and it's brought them together in terms of this joint work. So they were feeling less isolated by being part of the project, and of course they were representing exactly the kind of First Nation government that, as they came together, Lac-Seul, KI, and Sioux Lookout, they wanted to recognize it as a hub, Sioux Lookout municipality being a hub of services and support to these to the 31 remote First Nations or in the area. KI really was able to be that kind of partner, and they've grown they actually have, Sioux Lookout in fact has friendship relations with a larger group of First Nations, so they've been quite a pioneer in looking at how they can work with several First Nation governments. I know they've done some work they included several First Nations and invited them in to work with them on their 5-year strategic plan a couple of years ago as the town of Sioux Lookout, and that launched some really interesting initiatives for a business hub for communities who were remote and who needed to come to Sioux Lookout for business purposes. So that's one example, and that's on our website. And then there's an emerging example, in Ontario, where we've got the Hiawatha First Nation and Curve Lake First Nation in collaboration, just starting out a collaboration with Peterborough FDev, the County of Peterborough, and the Township of Selwyn. And again, it just makes sense where they all are geographically to be partners in the work that they're going to do, and their work will be, they have some ideas already, but it will be on land use planning and consultation and possibly a GIS. There's still in early days, but that's the grouping that we have in Ontario. So definitely this work is possible with several partners, and again through the visioning process and relationship accords and tools like a working group terms of reference. It can be very well identified, the roles and responsibilities and sovereign recognition of sovereignty through those tools as well. Hope that answered your question, Valerie.
Thank you. So our next question is from Jared Slater again, and he says, I understand that the next intake is pending. What services can CEDI offer to partnerships, i.e. facilitation services?
Do you want to speak?
Okay, I can take that. Yes, Gerald, that's another great question. So at the moment, we are a small but powerful team. We like to think of ourselves. We're 4, and we're pretty much taken up by these 10 partnerships at the moment. However, I would like to say that using our tools, one recommendation would be that we could, through our networks, we might be able to identifying facilitators who've used our tools or who are aware of our tools, or Indigenous or Indigenous strategic planning, joint strategic planning, folks who've worked with municipalities. We might be able to use our LinkedIn collaboration network. We've got almost 500 members, so there's a real community of practice emerging of people who are working in this area and involved in this area. So that might be a place to identify somebody. In terms of a facilitator, given that we're fully booked with the work we have on our plate right now. And then another answer to that question might be to, depending on where you are geographically, we've put together financial resources mentioned earlier by Marissa, and this is a sort of a table on our website that tries to identify, and we're always looking for more resources that people know of that we don't have there. And these are resources that potentially many of them could be used for joint collaboration work. So potentially looking in there, there's a C2C fund if you're in BC, the Community to Community Fund that's implemented by First Nation Summit and the Union of British Columbia Municipalities, and there's an application process for that. That is a place where if you're in BC, you can actually get some funds for facilitation, and sort of thing that we've tried to find across Canada those kinds of resources that could be drawn upon. So have a look. Hopefully there's something that could support the work you're doing or want to do, and of course, posting questions to our LinkedIn. We could get a conversation going if there's any particular theme or topic around facilitation, finding a facilitator, etc. So please reach out to our connection and communication tools like the LinkedIn Community of Practice, and we'd be happy to share some thoughts and see if others out there who are in this community of practice could support as well. Anything to add, Marissa? I don't know if you...
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
Okay, great. So our next question from Winifredo Dagley, and they ask, do you apply CEDI in resolving environmental issues or in coming up with environmental conservation plan? Any good cases?
Marissa, would you like to start with that one?
Well, I'm thinking, Helen's been around the program much longer than I have, so she'll probably have the wealth of examples here. But the only thing that's coming to mind is that a lot of our partnerships, even currently, when working on particularly on tourism strategies, there is a large component of conservation within that, conservation of land management, land stewardship, ensuring that Indigenous, the local Indigenous population, the local First nations have the opportunity to manage and steward the land in a culturally appropriate way, in a way that is very conscious of conservation of those lands for future generations. So that's something that's coming to mind. Helen, do you have anything more specific?
From what I understand, the Whistler Center for Sustainable Development, and you can Google that, they've done some of this kind of work, at least in BC, where they've done sustainability planning with First Nation governments and municipal governments. So that might be a source of how joint planning has been used for sustainability planning. Again, in terms of our tools that we offer, they could be very much adapted to then moving into, we talked about earlier, the connect stage, the vision stage, and then joint planning steps after that. A theme could very much, the theme of environmental conservation planning could be the joint initiative, and then moving forward with joint planning in that respect. And as I mentioned, I think when we talked about the Nova Scotia example, they started with, in their land use planning day, they started with traditional use of land, and that would be a really great place to start and look at any, moving from that to any environmental issues. Just the example back in Quebec with Kebewak, First Nation, Timiskaming, and Kippewa, while they looked at at a high level some of their concerns around the environmental impact of mining, they ended up putting in their vision something that was really, in their terms, was looking at how to work with the environmental offering of their area, if you like, how to work with pristine lakes and look at how they can work together around conservation through some of the tourism aspects that they're working on. So they've chosen that path in terms of for their CED project. It's more along the lines of looking at long-term impact on the environment through their project. So those are sort of bigger, higher level ways of looking at it, but definitely the tools that we propose in the toolkit could be very much adapted for doing any kind of joint work on environmental planning if that was a joint initiative.
Okay. Our next question is from Savannah Seaton, and she asks, how competitive was phase 1, the pilot, and phase 2 of the CEDI initiative? I.e., how many applicants did you receive, how many successful, and how many turned away?
Well, I was there for the first round, and it was very difficult to make decisions, and we had a criteria, and we'd spent really a long time looking at how we could respond to there was more than 250 applications in the first round, so I guess you could say it was quite competitive. And then the second round, we had, and so in the first round, we chose 6 partnerships out of the 250 applications. And then in the second round, we had over 90, and we had the chance to choose 10. So things got, chances got better, I guess, if you could say, in the second round. This is a continual dilemma for us on the program. We know the demands are out there. There's 634 First Nations across the country, and we feel like we're just getting started and just a drop in the bucket. So our hope is that the program can be expanded to make it not as much a competition, but really to serve everybody's needs. So great question, and we're hoping to expand and offer more.
All right. And our next question is from Savannah as well. Is there a strong municipal example of a partnership with local First Nations on cultural competency training to teach on local stories?
Oh, great question. Maybe Marissa would like to respond.
Sure. Well, I'm actually thinking about the work that we do in Workshop 1 that you would find within the toolkit. Recommended exercise that we do is the historical timeline exercise, and what we do is we ask both communities to work separately for this activity. We ask them to document major milestone dates, activities, events that have existed over the timeline of their communities, and we recommend that they include things, social events, cultural events, spiritual, economic, you name it, law, development, kind of all of it, and we then talk our way through those histories. The communities will then present to one another on those histories, and we find that is just a really wonderful jumping off point, because while that activity in and of itself gives quite a bit of strength to the conversation, it's the dialogue that follows and surrounds it that's so very impactful. I'm thinking about a workshop we just did back in December with some partners, and the opportunity for dialogue, for sharing, to say, to really clarify different key points and why the history was so deeply personal from the nation, and why maybe from the municipality it was a little more structural and focused in development. And there was opportunity to learn about how the nation over history, of course, had to find its way into Canadian system, into Canadian, they were through assimilation and colonization, forced into adapting to the Canadian system. And so the learnings that happened there, it's resonating for me, as one municipal councillor said, I've learned more in this last 30 minutes than I have in 30 years. And so increasingly, well, that's only Workshop 1, and that's something we bring to Workshop 1 as an exercise. We find that our partners continue to find locally informed and Indigenous informed practices and learning opportunities as we continue to build out the relationship building. So, for instance, even with Bagnakeag and Antigonish, the blanket exercise was brought it is a Kairos exercise, but it was brought and delivered by 2 women who live in the area, who are Indigenous women who live in the area. and we're able to speak to some of the more poignant local historical events and stories. And it really is a continuation of, once the relationship is developed, you're more able to learn with one another and from one another over the time, and we certainly do see that.
If I may just add that one of the tools that we use in as Marissa described in the Connect phase, is an evaluation, self-evaluation, where one of the questions is, what do you know of the culture of your neighbor? And it does get into, there's some sort of sub-questions around protocol, et cetera. And that's one way that, and it's a mutual evaluation. So the municipality is evaluating itself against what it knows about its Indigenous neighbors' protocol and cultural learning, and et cetera. And often they do, municipalities, a little trend that I've seen is that they score themselves quite low, and usually, and just because perhaps a lack of venue for that learning to happen, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And when that exercise is done, then the question can be asked, then how would you then, through this partnership, increase your learning in that area? So while it's not, I guess I could say, a rigorous cultural competency measurement, it gives the chance for the First Nation partner to then work with them on, maybe the next workshop to bring something, a learning. We've had that happen in many places, where each workshop is a venue and opportunity for cultural learning. And I do know that one of our partnerships in BC, the city of Vernon is actually has decided to do some cultural competency training as a step as well, coming in this coming year. So there are partnerships that are where the municipality is taking that on.
Okay. Our next question is from Judy Gucher. If groups were able to find their own funding to initiate this process, would CEDI Cando be able to support their process as a minimum, the initial facilitation?
Marissa, would you like to speak to that? Or?
Well, I think it speaks to the question that you've answered a little bit earlier, Helen. And so I think, the answer is that, at this moment, we are really at full capacity. That being said, if there's any way that, we could help to advise around suggested process, or like, as we've mentioned, the financial resources that are available, if there's any way that we could support and suggest, next best way forward, we would of course, ask you to sort of follow the toolkit. It is a practice that we follow as well. And to help you explore alternative options, because at this time, as Helen has mentioned, those are the tools that we can offer. But our contact information will be included in on the last slide, and I really welcome for you to follow up with us directly, and I would definitely be open to have a call with you and help to inform the next best steps, if you'd like that.
Okay. So our next question's from Alvin Murdoch. And he asks, are there partnerships between a First Nations and a local governing body that acts as a municipality but not legislatively defined as a municipality?
Do you mind just repeating that, Megan, so I'm capturing the whole question? Thank you.
Yep. Are there partnerships between a First Nations and a local governing body that acts as a municipality but not legislatively defined as a municipality?
I could maybe take a stab at that, and maybe Marissa, if you have anything to add. A couple of interesting types of governance models that we've seen across the country are actually in Quebec. There is a regional body that is made up of First Nation, it's Iwistashee, and the Jamesian municipal government, and they form a regional government that actually is a legislative body. So that's one example that exists. So they do have a formal recognized body as municipal government and First Nation government. There are some examples out in BC where we've seen First Nation governments sitting on regional municipal boards, having a role there. Your question was more about informal. I would say that one example is in Alberta. There's a tri-council between the Sawridge First Nation, the Lesser Slave River MD, and the town of Slave Lake, and they have a body, and I would say it's got its own structure and a formalized structure, but it doesn't have a legislative role, and they have done so. They really do collaborate. They have a joint economic development committee. They have some other committees that they have working. So it's not a legislative body, or it's not formally recognized as such, but a very rigorously structured body that's supporting all three of them in their given their close proximity. And I know they did a regional growth plan, which is on the link to that is on our website, and that's where there is a formal municipal to municipal agreement in that regional growth plan, and Sawridge has a letter within that regional growth plan, just validating that this plan is a guiding plan for them to something to that extent, but also that it doesn't abrogate any sovereignty or any treaty rights. And so that's another vehicle, if you like, of planning, that it's not it's not a legal document for them, but it's more, I would say, a planning guide. And really their goal there is to ensure that investors and planning happens seamlessly, and it's been done through support from planning experts that the three of them have engaged together. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a few examples. Perhaps, did you want anything to add, Marissa?
No, I think that's good. But I will just ask, Megan's asked that we maybe you forward the slide, Helen, to our contact information, just in case anybody would like to capture that.
Oh, sorry about that. That should have been up there all the time.
Okay, and so we have another question, and it might be our last one. It's from Savannah Seaton, and she asks, is the evaluation criteria shared before and or during the intake period in terms of preparation? In terms of resources spread across the country, can you speak to the demand you have experienced for BC and or Western Canada region if these considerations are taken into account during the selection process?
Excellent questions. So yes, I've been around for both processes, so I could share something with you. So the evaluation criteria, I would say yes, because when the call is put out, we do spell out why we're doing this, who we're looking for. So the evaluation criteria are pretty much in the call out. Then we do. So there's two rounds of that. There's just the call out, and then when the applications are received, and then sorting through that list, and then there's then from matching up the criteria with the intake, we did go through a very extensive phone interview process with I would say probably 2/3 of the applicants of the last round who were meeting the criteria, and that was quite a thorough process, and we would share upfront what we were going to ask questions about, etc. And it was we were, because of this program, we're trying to, especially in the first round, we wanted to make sure every First Nation and every municipal government saw themselves in the examples and work that we were doing. So we did try to make it very representative. So we did have across the country, and again, this time as well, out of our 10 partnerships, we actually do have 2 in BC out of the 10, and 2 in Alberta out of the 10. So we've been trying to balance that regionally. So we would continue to look at that in a way that we try to meet needs where the number of First Nations are greater, for example. And in terms of the demand, good question. Yeah, we haven't. I don't know if we've really done an analysis on the numbers and the where they're from. I would just say anecdotally, they're still coming from across the country. Perhaps a concentration in in Ontario, BC, and Manitoba would be just anecdotally at the moment. Marissa, anything to add?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I think across the country, you know, as we travel through, you know, different opportunities to present to and work with at different conferences, the level of interest, it really does range across the country. And, you know, I think these are definitely things that we continue to take into consideration for the next phase, hopefully, of the work. And increasingly what helps is hearing about the level of interest. And so we really appreciate knowing which communities are looking for support, are interested in the toolkit. It really helps us document and better propose future iterations of the programming to our funders. So we welcome that to communicate with us the level of interest in where you're situated.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you for adding that.
And I just would really, Megan, if it's okay, I'd like to just, there was a comment that came in, and I feel that it maybe was speaking to the question that I had answered around the question around cultural competency. And Stephen had shared a comment that it's not the job of the First Nations to educate councillors and citizens, and we couldn't agree more. This really, our approach is around co-learning, and the example that I shared was exactly that, was the education from a First Nation member to passing education along to a city councillor. But the opportunity there is to learn from and with one another. And oftentimes we see just our First Nations partners are so incredibly gracious in the spirit of collaboration and partnership, but in no way is it our expectation. So I would completely agree with that. And thank you for sending that in that comment and that opportunity to clarify.
Maybe just to add, we do encourage our municipal members and those interested in this kind of work and process to use the resources themselves and bring themselves up to speed. We have a whole section on the website and in the toolkit referring to various resources that have been recommended from those of us who are from Indigenous perspective of what municipal elected officials and members should be learning when they embark on this. So, and very keen to hear any other suggestions from that realm. If there's anything you want to send us and suggest to us that you think would be helpful for the municipalities to learn and refer to before or as they do this work. So very open to suggestions on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so we have another question from Darlene Pay-Pompey. And she asks, are there any plans for entrepreneurship programs for women at community level?
Marissa, would you like to?
Can you repeat that question? It's not showing up for me in the text box.
It's in the chat box.
Oh.
Yeah, it's up there. Any plans for entrepreneurship programs for women at the community level?
Mm-hmm. No, but I know of a number of wonderful entrepreneurship programs that work specifically with Indigenous women that we could send some links ahead with Megan, but definitely, I mean, this is something that, you know, is a part of the conversation often when we're speaking with First Nations in particular, is encouraging for entrepreneurship within the membership, but it's not something we really directly approach. But Helen, unless you've had a different experience, and then like I say, I'm happy to pass along information and links that I could share with Megan to further circulate.
At the moment, no, we don't have anything directly related to entrepreneurship for women. I will give a little plug for at FCM, we have something called the Diverse Voices Program, and that's encouraging women in municipal and elected positions. So that's another avenue. I mean, of course, it's not entrepreneurship, but I just wanted to give a plug for that program because they've had big response from women from Indigenous women and Indigenous and non-Indigenous women across the country for that program, and folks might find that useful. But in terms of entrepreneurship, no, it's not one of our areas of specialty that we have any expertise in to offer at the moment. So I think the best would be for if Cando has anything to link into any links that we could send back to Megan that Cando might have, but it's not necessarily our area of expertise.
Okay, and we have one last question, which is, this will be our last question. So if you do have any other ones, you can feel free to copy down Marissa and Helen's contact information on the slide there. So the last question is, it's just to clarify, they just want to know if you answered, if people are able to find their own funding to initiate the process, would CEDI Cando be able to support this process?
I think we did our best to answer that question, which really was to forward, continue to sort of encourage you to find our financial resources page on our website. At this time, as Helen has expressed, we are at full capacity in what we as a small but mighty team are able to deliver with our 10 current partnerships. And we would be very pleased, as I've offered, please take down our contact information and feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to advise best next steps forward, potential opportunities, speak to any of the funding opportunities as best as we can, although they are external to us, and help to encourage you to move that process forward. But we're here to support as best as we can. Unfortunately, at this time, we just don't have the capacity to offer any further facilitation services.
Okay.
And we encourage you to join our LinkedIn community of practice as well, because that would be a great professional network to be part of.
Okay, and with that, I would like to thank our presenters, Helen Patterson and Marissa Lawrence, for their great and informative presentation, as well as our audience for their participation and questions.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, and thanks for all those great questions.
Yeah.